Most of the millennials, Gen Zers, work harder than the most recent generations before us. Here's why. We have to have jobs. You cannot survive without a job in this economy. We have to work our asses off to pay our rent, utilities, insurance, and other bills. This is non-negotiable. In addition to that, most of the young people I know are taking 12 to 15 credits in college. They are working toward their degrees because they've been sold the dream that a college degree will get them a better life. On top of that, working unpaid internships in order to secure the careers they're training for. That's non-stop work. 7 days a week. All I ever see in this subreddit is how lazy this younger generations are, when they're working harder than most boomers could imagine in their lives for much less payoff. I have a job, an internship, and I take 6 classes because I absolutely have to. Stop telling me my generation is lazy when we're working our asses off to make it in this fucked up economy your generation created. I've worked hard than anyone in the last generation of my family already. They all had jobs where they could gossip all day, get full benefits and buy houses by my age. And they act like I'm the laziest member. I remember my mom, 60 years old, talks about how in college she was an RA, resident assistant, in the campus dorms all the way through college. On what she made from that part-time job, she was able to pay for most of her tuition and have a brand new car paid off by the time she graduated. In complete contrast, I finished my undergrad just 5 years ago. During that time I went full-time with 16 credits plus and worked 30 to 36 hours a week. Honestly, it made me feel like I got cheated twice because I was so tired all the time. I feel like I didn't retain as much from my classes. And I'm still $46K in debt. American dream, baby. We did it. I think the operative phrase here is, for a much lower payoff. This is to say that we don't necessarily work harder on the whole, but that our hard work can't possibly carry us anywhere near as far as it did the previous 2 generations. No amount of sheer exertion, time investment, or specialized skills will elevate the average modern worker to an equivalent position with their parents or grandparents with a similarly desirable skill set in their day. I see a lot of Gen X either agreeing or feeling left out. If you were born in the back end of Gen X, c. 1978 to 1981, then you're not purely Gen X or millennial. You were born at the tip of the spear that penetrated the job market that millennials came of age in. This entire intergenerational economic oppression Olympics, general culture war is manufactured capitalist propaganda to keep us fighting amongst ourselves. I've also seen some mentions of the grueling manual labor that was common 2 or 3 generations ago. May I remind everyone that organized labor literally fought and died for improved labor conditions? That the New Deal was instrumental in getting the U.S. back on its feet after the Great Depression and World War II? Any UK users feel to chime in on how Britain handled post-war reconstruction? That's not in my wheelhouse. That McCarthyist propaganda reshaped our culture and sweeping deregulation killed the American dream for the working class? With every step forward, the entrenched establishment got right to work trying to regress labor and civil rights. Maybe we can stop drawing comparisons to how much harder or easier things used to be, and start taking action to advance the work of the people who wanted a better world for us. Work that has unfortunately been undone to many extents. If we don't start soon, our only recourse will be to resort to the same means used by our forebears. I'm a 50-year-old Gen Xer who has worked in the same field for over 30 years. I was able to get my position without any college I was working toward a degree which cost less than I currently spend for 2 months' rent. I just walked in and was given the job because they needed someone who could draw. Today, for the same position, new hires must have at least a bachelor's degree, portfolio, and work experience. Those kids that do get hired are fucking talented. And they hustle, running circles around my prehistoric ass. So you'll never hear me disparage their work ethic. From what I can see, they just want to be treated with respect. Which really isn't too much to ask. Workers of all generations had it bad. That's the point of class war. You, the producer, the laborer, have been exploited by the land-owning elite. It isn't a generational conflict. It is a class conflict. Around 1970, as the average boomer was entering adulthood, a global economic crisis struck. It's a fascinating and complicated moment in the history of capital, but why this crisis happened is not my point in this reply. My reply is about what boomers and Gen X experienced economically in the U.S. as a result, especially in and near cities. Boomers were roughly half still college age, half a bit older more or less, give or take. Their kids, if they had any, were very young. The cost of living and the availability of jobs was pretty rocky already, and was about to get much worse. For context, women were typically unable to get credit cards unless via their husband's account. All manner of housing discrimination was very common. Boomers were being legally forced to join the military and be shipped to a massive war the U.S. was losing in multiple countries in East Asia. Taught in schools as the Vietnam War, if taught much at all. Whitey was on the moon and a rat done bit my sister Nell. Gil Scott-Heron. Look him up. The rates of inflation and unemployment were bad enough that the President Nixon imposed price controls including rent and wage prices. In some cities, men advertised for and likely often found desperate female roommates who could have a room for free if they explicitly agreed to provide sex work to the male roommate on a fixed schedule. Radical heroes, especially but not exclusively black, were being made into political prisoners. Some still are. The President Nixon kicked off the so-called war on drugs to encourage more police brutality and incarceration against anti-war protesters, Black Power revolutionaries, organizers of underground women-run abortion service networks, Quaker and other run underground networks for draft evaders, etc. Step out of line and the man will cut you down. People didn't say stuff like that back then without reason. A little bit of technical detail. Nixon had little or no choice but to unilaterally end the practice of settling international debts in gold in order to devalue the dollar. As the value of the dollar plummeted, wages were still the same number of dollars, but the prices of everything else rose with outrageous amounts of inflation. By the 1980s, employment picked up and inflation slowed. Presidents Carter and Reagan did this through some technical tricks. But the catch was wages were so poor that multi-adult households usually could no longer get by without multiple adults taking jobs. The work hours per family, for example, went through the roof compared to what they had been. Just to break even, almost. Gen X entered the labor market in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, and only a tiny minority had any realistic shot at secure, wealth-building career paths. Many of us dropped out that track because it was cut off. You can see some of this in the movies we liked. For example, a not unpopular ethic was steal stuff from work, especially your time. Official stats show us significantly richer at the same age as present young adults. You'd have a hard time convincing me that was completely false, but also I think it's a much smaller difference in reality than official figures suggest. The economy, however, is absolutely 100% more hostile to workers today, and the hours young adults are forced to sell to survive as ridiculous, but also systemically built into the progress of capital. The capitalist form of economy just does this and has for 3 generations now. Trying to muster some intergenerational solidarity might be a better idea than promoting intergenerational hatred and conflict. And remember, it's not coincidence that the first action the state took was killing and locking up anti-capitalist revolutionaries. Hi. Gen X here, and I was the previous generation. I did the same in the early 2000s as well. I worked a crappy job for $5 an hour, went to college and gave up any life whatsoever and lived with my parents until 27 so I could get a degree and teaching credential, and then had to wait 2 years before I got a teaching position in 2007. Then the shot hit the fan and was working for 2 years as an intervention teacher for less than half the pay. No benefits, and my job could disappear after 6 weeks. When the state found out, they shut down, so I was unemployed for 2.5 years. Then I had to work a very difficult teaching job for 5 years before I had the one I have now. It wasn't easy. Gen X here. I had it better. My day job paid 85% tuition reimbursement toward a work-related degree if I got a C or better. My company paid over $25,000 for me to go to night school, and then paid more for me to take my licensing exam. Engineer. And the day after, I got my engineer's seal in the mail. The company laid off 60% of the staff, including me, due to the 2009 recession. No tuition payback necessary. Just thanks for your service, and have 4 weeks severance and 2 months health insurance in gratitude. 4 months later I get a new job. And 10 years later I make double what I did at the end. All because they paid my tuition. My part was basically a car payment a month. For 6 years. Rolling the reimbursement over every semester. And at the end I got over $1,000 for the last reimbursement payment. I had it easier than anyone does today. And no one should have to grind as hard as I did. With a full-time job and college at night. It should be easier. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. Gen X is the first generation to do worse than our parents. Social Security won't be there for those born after 1972. We were the first who couldn't afford college by just working. We were the first ones who moved back home. Don't confuse us with boomers. We are slackers because we figured out meaningless work sucked long before you were playing on your PlayStation. I'm not sure it's hard work so much as benefiting from the work. Millennials are the hard work that doesn't pay generation. You're mixing issues here. All generations work, ed hard, long hours, unappreciated, etc. Everyone was called lazy by the generations before them. No matter which one. The giant difference is money. The older generation's wages and expenses allowed for a middle-class life. That's not the case anymore. Wages haven't kept up. Foundational expenses, housing, education, childcare, have skyrocketed. And services are now subscriptions instead of one-time purchases. Saving is a pipe dream. Especially in this forum. Don't fall the fake generational battles. They want us to fight from within. If we are divided, we're easier to conquer. Gen X here. Worked 2 jobs all through college. And even when I started working, I still had a part-time job on top of my full-time gig for a couple of years. The system certainly is unfair and biased in many different ways, no matter how hard one works in the system. That said, I think it's worth remembering there were plenty of generations of people working harder, more brutal, jobs than modern Western millennials face right now. And I would venture to guess globally we can certainly find people working back-breaking labor dusk till dawn with little reward. One of the biggest reasons the current situation is despised by Western millennials, US in particular, is because our expectations are so much higher. Our countries are very rich. Now why can't it be better than it was just a short generation or two before? Instead, our lives have become bogged down in techno-bureaucracy, corporatization, and now inflation. Things certainly suck. And hard-working people are finding it harder get by because it's basically designed that way. I read a book about turn-of-the-century steel manufacturing labor. 12-hour days 7 days a week. Burns. Mutilations were common and you came home each day caked in filth with little money to show for it. Our modern predicament is stressful, unfair and strange, but not nearly as physically cruel on the average. Except maybe factory animal farming. I do, however, think that the psychological pain-induced workplace pressures could eventually be worse. Probably not. At least because of wealth accumulation and distribution. It's all perspective. People now do not have it any harder than the generation before. Read up on the Great Depression when you have a sec. On your phone. With the internet. Boomers are dead set in destroying the system they had for themselves so no one else can benefit or one-up them. That's how goddamn selfish they are, and then have the audacity to call everyone else lazy. Fucking sick of it. Gen X here. Speak for yourself. Gen X here. Dude. You're not the only one that had to work. Stop believing it's all on you and everyone had it great. This is the type of post that people make fun of in this sub. I think those generations did also have to work to survive. Except those born wealthy. Which is still true today. So I wouldn't overstate that it is much worse now. The big factors that make it hard today economically are the cost of housing, education, and gas, which are way more than they were then. The costs of things that were more expensive then that have largely come down in cost are things like electronics and clothes, which were signs of luxury spending in their time because they were relatively much more expensive then. So they see us buying those things and use that as their basis for judgment. When just the baseline living costs are so much higher and they aren't really in tune with those costs anymore, especially those that own homes. They are gaining wealth from the same economic trend that is screwing young people.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Eracast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.